Hi, I'm Tracy Kimball.
And I'm Tom Kimball. Welcome to MS Learn Online.
There's so much to learn when you live with MS. I know I want to learn as much as I can about the disease, treatments, management strategies, and so on. But I also want to know what the future holds. And the key to the future lies in the research that's being done today.
Yes, but sometimes understanding what the research means without a PhD can be a bit challenging. In this installment, our medical correspondent Rick Summers spoke with Dr. Robert Lisak, a neurologist with Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan.
Rick asked Dr. Lisak about the progress that's being made in MS research.
Well, I think it's a very exciting time for MS research because we're making a lot of progress. We're dealing with a very complex disease and with a very complex system, the nervous system and the other systems involved, such as the immune system. And we need to be optimistic, we need to also be realistic, and we need to be thorough in our research. I think the areas of tremendous progress, one is genetics. We're at the stage where we have the technology to look at minor changes in multiple different genes because the hereditary factor in MS, while strong, is not a classic single gene like Huntington's or Duchenne muscular dystrophy or sickle cell anemia or something like that. We're making incredible progress with the molecular biology using new modern techniques to look at brain tissue and spinal cord tissue, animal models, tissue culture models to try to get an idea of how the lesions evolve and how we can try to interfere with that. I think the research in MRI is spectacular. I mean, MRI, when it first came out, was a wonderful diagnostic tool for MS and still is, but it's given us tremendous insights into the evolution of the disease, how early it starts even before the symptoms are present. And with the newer technology, we're being able to see and predict things downstream to distinguish different things going on in lesions that we were not able to distinguish with the older techniques of just simply, is there a lesion and is it likely to be MS or not? I think we're seeing a lot of very interesting things with clinical trials. For those of us who date back far enough to remember when there were no real clinical trials with MS, we have a huge number of clinical trials going on, some NIH funded, some pharmaceutical company funded, some other independent foundation funded. And these not only are giving great promise to new ways of treating MS, but we learn about it. Even a trial that unfortunately turns out to perhaps be negative, we're learning from that. We like the trials not to be negative, but a negative trial that we learn something from is not really a negative trial in totality. It's at least positive from learning something about the evolution and pathogenesis of multiple sclerosis.
When I was diagnosed back in the mid-1990s, which all of a sudden is now turn of the century, I was invited by my MS doctor to participate as a newly diagnosed patient in a trial, and I didn't know exactly what that meant. Talk me through, first of all, how people get involved in trials other than being invited, and then once they do, moving forward, just give me kind of a snapshot.
Well, clinical trials are, as you probably know, since you're involved with this, are divided into different types. There are local clinical trials that are just done at one or two institutions, and there are others that lead to larger trials. So we have, as you know, phase 1 trials. Phase 1 trials are mainly safety and dose finding. Phase 2 is proof of concept. They're usually relatively brief. They have a much larger number of patients, and they often use a surrogate endpoint to try to get a relatively quick idea of whether this is a promising drug or a promising line of clinical trial research, or whether it's likely to be a dead end and not worth wasting both patient, physician time, pharma time, NIH, MS Society time on it. And those are the so-called phase 2, and we use MRI a lot in those, especially for relapsing remitting MS. The phase 3 are what we call the pivotal trials, and those have to have a clinical outcome as their main outcome, at least in the United States for the FDA, to license a drug if it's new, and to allow the company to promote the drug if it's already on the market for some other disease. And those trials require large numbers because MS is quite a variable disease, especially relapsing remitting MS early on. So you have these type of trials which are important, and they have primary outcomes, which is usually clinical, and then secondary outcomes such as MRI and sometimes laboratory studies and so forth.
Tell me about the terms double-blind and placebo, which are terms that people will encounter.
So double-blind means that the patient does not know what therapy they're on, nor do the investigating physicians. So if you take a standard pivotal trial, the patient doesn't know if they're getting a dummy injection or they're a live drug, or a dummy pill or a live pill, potentially live pill, meaning the drug under test. And the physicians involved, and we usually have what we call a treating physician and an examining physician, they don't know either, so the computer knows, which allows us, in case of any problems, to, if necessary, to break the code and take the patient out of the trial if there's a safety issue. But this allows, as objective as one can get, in doing a clinical trial in a variable disease. So that's what double-blinded means. There are single-blind where the patient knows but the physician doesn't.
Okay.
Those are sometimes done. Then you have the other type of question about placebo. So placebo means that a group of the patients, sometimes half, sometimes a third, depends on what's being studied, are getting an inert substance. That is, if it's an injection, it's frequently the carrier that the active drug or the presumed active drug is dissolved in. If it's a pill, it's often the same material that is used to help make up the pill of the drug being tested, to try to allow for variation in the disease where patients may not have relapses or may not progress if they're on placebo. And we need to know if the drug is better than nothing, or placebo, which is usually better than nothing as well, and when you look at people who've not been in trials.
These are highly monitored through every
These
step.
are monitored at every step. FDA is involved. The funding agency, if it's an NIH trial, is heavily involved. Every institution that participates has to have their own institutional review board review these and make sure that they feel that they're ethical and safe. And any significant side effects, whether the patient may be on placebo or not, get reported back to the central coordinating center and get reported to the local IRB board. And if it's a significant one, even if it comes from another center, our center would know about it because it would then be sent through the centralized coordinating center, so that these are safe as can be. Now, there's no guarantees that they're, and no one should think that these are not potentially a problem. The phase 1 and phase 2 studies should hopefully pick up significant safety side effects, but since they tend to be shorter studies, sometimes they don't. And I think that patients, being in a clinical trial requires a dedication by the patient. It's a major commitment.
Dr. Lisak, what are some of the trends we're starting to see now in clinical trials?
There are several trends. So one trend is combination trials. So taking from the cancer people, the oncologists, they try drugs in combination. In fact, there's a very large NIH-sponsored clinical trial comparing one form of interferon with gluteramine acetate with the combination. And the question is the combination that much better than either drug by themselves? There's no placebo in that group, okay? And you need a very large number of patients because everybody's going to do better than you would think untreated because they're all on active, at least one active drug. So that's one example. A second phase you're going to see is oral agents because obviously from the point of view of the patients, weekly, daily, 3 times a week injections, even intravenous once a month or so is not something people like to do. And it does tie up time and so forth. Obviously oral agents are another trend. We're seeing a lot of so-called monoclonal antibodies, that is humanized or partially humanized animal monoclonal antibodies merged with mouse specificity against particular candidate molecules that may be important in the pathogenesis of MS. So we're seeing those, and in fact, one of them is currently available, natalizumab. There are several others that are in, have had phase 2 and into early phase 3 studies. So we're seeing that. And then there's a whole question of things called small molecules. So they can be either oral or injectables. And the idea behind those is that they would not only be able to affect the presumed immune pathogenesis in the peripheral immune system, but by being small and presumably soluble in lipids and fats, would be able to get into the brain and might potentially be able to work directly on the inflammation and the damage going on in the brain and help with regeneration. Whereas right now, all we have is indirect evidence in animal models for a few of the immunomodulating agents, and the knowledge that one of the agents that is in a has been successful in phase 2 and now is being randomized into phase 3, a drug called fingolimod, that we do know can get into the brain, and that may be for good or for bad, we don't know yet. But so I think those are the major trends, but there's always somebody who's got another idea out there. And the MS Society publishes, I believe it's once a year, or maybe every 2 years, a book of the clinical trials that they know about. That is, those that either pharma or the investigators or the NIH or the NMSS, if they're a sponsor of one of the trials, will publishes to let it be known. And the other thing is that the American Academy of Neurology's official journal, Neurology, does now have a section in which investigators, not just in MS, but in other neurologic diseases, can essentially have announcements that we are doing a trial in drug X in MS, or drug Y in ALS, or drug Z in Parkinson's disease, and we are looking for volunteers for the study. Please call the study coordinator at 1-800 whatever. So there are those are the trends I think we're seeing, but I think all bets all possibilities are out there.
There's a lot happening in MS research now, and it's so exciting.
And I appreciate getting an explanation about research that even I can understand, and getting an idea of where to go for accurate information.
Thanks to Dr. Lisak for helping us understand the world of MS research.
And thank you for joining us on MS Learn Online.